Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Al24 Nightly News. I'm your host, Mariam Zian, and here are your top stories for tonight. 150 martyrs were martyred in 16 massacres against Palestinians in the past 24 hours in Gaza, bringing the death toll to 26,900 with more than 65,000 injured. The UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, said Israeli occupation refuses the entry of the humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip for unclear reasons. And Algiers calls for the necessity of holding the Zionist occupation accountable and protecting the Palestinian people from the genocide they're being subjected to. Farmers' protests expand across Europe against rising costs, EU environmental policies, and cheap food imports. And the details after the break. Hello and welcome back to the program. In only 24 hours, occupation forces in Palestine committed 16 massacres against Palestinian families in Gaza. The assault killed nearly 150 people and wounded 313. The death toll from the Zionist assault against Palestinians is nearing 27,000 casualties since October the 7th, whereas almost 66,000 others have been wounded. In the 117th day of relentless attacks, 6 Palestinians lost their lives and many were injured as Zionist warplanes bombed Khan Yunis. And in parallel, airstrikes hit Gaza City neighborhoods, exacerbating the already dire humanitarian crisis in the besieged Strip. Husam Barkan.
Approaching the 27,000 mark in casualties, the Gaza Strip witnessed heavy artillery bombardment in the center and west of Khan Yunis. Clashes and gunfire erupted near Nasser Medical Hospital, and the Nasmawi neighborhood faced severe artillery fire. The city center witnessed a devastating residential square explosion, continuing its aggression. The occupation forces targeted northern Gaza and launched airstrikes on homes in Gaza cities Al-Rimal and Al-Zaytun neighborhoods. Ambulances struggled to reach the wounded, highlighting the grim reality of the conflict. For nearly 4 months, the northern Gaza Strip has borne the brunt of relentless bombings. The humanitarian conditions of residents, including the displaced, remain catastrophic, with increasing difficulties in accessing food and essential supplies.
This is food for the animals, but this is all what we have left. I have 7 people to feed. We have no food other than this.
The threat to aid from UNRWA further compounds the suffering, as it remains an indispensable lifeline for the population. As the conflict intensifies, the international community is grappling with the humanitarian crisis, urging for an immediate ceasefire and a lasting resolution to end the prolonged suffering in Gaza.
The health crisis in Gaza intensifies, especially at Al-Nasser Medical Hospital and Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis. Ashraf Al-Qudradi, spokesman of the Health Ministry, warned of deteriorating conditions. He held the Zionist occupation responsible and urgently appealed to the International Committee of the Red Cross and UN institutions for intervention to protect hospitals and provide emergency aid. The Palestinian Red Crescent reported ongoing Zionist attacks on Al Amal Hospital and Red Crescent headquarters in Khan Yunis. Around 100 medical and ambulance crews and 7,000 displaced individuals, mostly women and children, face constant fear. Urgent international intervention is sought to safeguard lives and facilities. UN Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Martin Griffiths said that the Israeli occupation refuses the entry of much of the humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip for unclear reasons. In his speech at the UN Security Council session devoted to discussing the measures of the International Court of Justice, Griffiths affirmed that the relevant UN bodies have faced repeated refusal by the Israeli occupation to enter desperately needed materials into Gaza, stressing that this is being done in an unclear, inconsistent, and non-specific manner. He called in this context to guarantee the right of the displaced people to return as required by international law.
We need to be able to enter Gaza via multiple points from Egypt and Israel. This would help clear bottlenecks, speed up delivery of supplies. We continue to face the issue of the rejection for entry of much-needed items into Gaza by Israel for reasons which are, at least to us, unclear and inconsistent.
Algeria called for the necessity of holding the Zionist occupation accountable and protecting the Palestinian people from the genocide they've been subjected to for more than 3 months now. In a speech during an emergency session of the UN Security Council devoted to the Palestinian issue requested by Algeria, Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ammar Ben Jamah, called for the implementation of all measures approved by the International Court of Justice following the lawsuit filed by South Africa against the Zionist occupation.
This historic decision on the part of the International Court of Justice reaffirms that the time of impunity has come to an end. The United Nations and the international community have committed to ensure that no criminal escape sanctions and accountability. The Israeli occupier must not be an exception to that rule. It is of the utmost importance to guarantee accountability in order to protect future generations from atrocities such as those being committed today in Gaza.
Algeria's representative to the United Nations also stressed the necessity of an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip to enable the implementation of the decision of the International Court of Justice.
We underscore the fact that the provisional measures imposed by the ICJ must be implemented to protect the Palestinian people from genocide that they are currently facing. We, in this connection, reaffirm that Israel, the occupying power, must immediately comply with the measures agreed upon by the court. It is incumbent upon the international community to ensure that Israel fully complies with those provisional measures. It is pivotal to put an end to the bloodshed and to the genocide of which the Palestinians are victim. Madam President, the provisional measures agreed upon by the International Court of Justice cannot be implemented in any other way but through a ceasefire. It is important to cease this absurd aggression immediately. It is crucial to achieve a ceasefire immediately.
Hamar Benjamin also reaffirmed the responsibility of the international community to raise the voice of justice and ensure the implementation of the decisions of the International Court of Justice. Let's take a listen.
Justice has spoken through the order issued by the ICJ. All of those that believe in an international order based on law and rules must strive to see the implementation of the provisional measures imposed by the International Court of Justice. That court has issued the view that it is Israel's duty as occupying power to guarantee and do so immediately the non-perpetration of murders of Palestinian people at the hands of its forces.
The UN Security Council voted unanimously on a draft press statement initiated by the Permanent Mission of Algeria and New York on the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza in light of the deteriorating humanitarian conditions as a result of the brutal aggression of the Zionist occupier. The statement urges all parties to engage with the chief UN Coordinator for Humanitarian Affairs and Reconstruction in Gaza, Sirit Kach, and to facilitate the implementation of her mandate as outlined in the Resolution 2720. And UN Security Council unanimously endorsed a draft statement urging increased humanitarian aid to Gaza, acknowledging the worsening conditions due to Zionist aggression. This aligned with Algeria's efforts to rally support for the Palestinian cause, emphasizing the urgent need for international aid.
It's very critical that we recognize the central role that UNRWA plays in the Gaza Strip in the delivery of humanitarian aid, and prior, of course, to the conflicts, when schools were open or the clinics were open or other facilities run by the agency, all those were services in support of the civilian population. There's an ongoing discussion. There's no substitution for the humanitarian role that is played in Gaza.
The World Health Organization Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus said the cutting funds for UNRWA, the largest supplier of humanitarian aid in this crisis, will have catastrophic consequences for the people of Gaza. Let's take a listen.
Decisions by various countries to pause funds for UNRWA, the largest supplier of humanitarian aid in this crisis, will have catastrophic consequences for the people of Gaza. No other entity has the capacity to deliver the scale and breadth of assistance that 2.2 million people in Gaza urgently need. We appeal for these announcements to be reconsidered.
Heads of UN humanitarian agencies warned against cutting off UNRWA funding, highlighting the disastrous consequences for Gaza. The United Nations International or Interagency Standing Committee stressed the severe threat to Gaza's humanitarian system, urging continued support to prevent widespread ramifications in the region. The growing divergences between the Zionist entity and its ally, the U.S., have emerged once again, and signs of tensions between them are continuing, with reports suggesting increased doubts about the success of the Paris negotiations, thus undermining any agreement that might lead to stopping the aggression on Gaza. Marwa Belaiwar.
The growing rift between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government over Israel's war in Gaza is now in the open, with public disagreement between the two worsened by a statement of the occupation Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announcing that there would be no release of prisoners and no forces withdrawal from the Strip before achieving their declared goals. A critical decision is about to be held due to efforts made by negotiators in Paris. Yet looming divergences within the entity itself are intensifying, as Benjamin Netanyahu is torn between accepting a deal with heavy concessions and face criticism from many Israelis, or rejecting it as demanded by far-right ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, risking the departure of centrist ministers. However, Hamas maintains that a comprehensive and long-term ceasefire is a necessary prerequisite for the group's release of prisoners. This is in contrast with the occupation government, which splits its views amid popular outcry demanding the release of the detainees at all costs.
Iran will respond to any threat from the United States, Tehran Revolutionary Guard's Chief Hossein Salami said on Wednesday as Washington prepares its response to the killing of American servicemen. During an official event, Iran's Salami said Tehran hears threats coming from U.S. officials, adding that no threat will be left unanswered. It's worth noting that Washington has blamed the drone attack, the first to kill U.S. troops in the Middle East since an escalation in regional violence, accompanying the Zionist war on Gaza on Hezbollah factions. The group said on Tuesday it was suspending military actions against the United States to avoid embarrassing the Baghdad government.
Sometimes the enemy makes threats, and even these days we hear some unnecessary threats from the worlds of American officials. We tell them that they have tested us in previous fields and we also have tested you. The common chapter between you and us is that we know each other. You know that we do not leave any threats unanswered. While we are not looking for war, we are not afraid of war, and we do not run away from it.
UN Secretary-General's personnel envoy to Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, held a meeting on Wednesday during his visit to Pretoria with South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor. UN Secretary-General spokesman Stefan Dujarric earlier affirmed at a press conference that de Mistura would visit South Africa at the government's invitation and would have held meetings with senior officials there with a special emphasis on Western Sahara issue.
The personal envoy of the Secretary-General for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, is on his way to South Africa at the invitation of the government for meetings tomorrow with senior South African officials to discuss the issue of Western Sahara.
Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf received on Wednesday the Speaker of the National Assembly of the Republic of Madagascar, Christine Raza Mana Hassoua, who is on an official visit to Algeria. A statement by the Algerian Foreign Ministry explained that the meeting constituted an opportunity during which the two sides reviewed the distinguished historical relations between Algeria and Madagascar and ways to enhance the bilateral cooperation and to expand it to include various fields of mutual benefit. On the sidelines of his presidency of the 8th session of the Algerian-Chinese Joint Committee for Economic, Commercial and Technical Cooperation held in the Chinese capital, Beijing, Algerian Housing Minister Tariq Belaribi met with his Chinese counterpart Ni Hong. A statement by the Ministry of Housing in Algeria indicated that the meeting aims to facilitate coordination between the two sides and to assess the outcomes of the meeting that brought the two ministers together last July during the visit of the Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune to the People's Republic of China. The same source added that numerous topics were discussed by experts during the meeting, particularly the two new cities that are underway in Algeria, namely Bougazoul and Mnia. Algerian Housing Minister Tariq Belaribi stressed the necessity for China and Algeria to share experiences and expertise in the field of technology and in the planning and construction of new cities, especially that Algeria is building cities such as Hassi Mas'oud, Al Mnia and Bougazoul. This came during Belaribi's visit to the new city of Xian'an, located 105 kilometers from the Chinese capital, Beijing, expected to draw 5 million people, according to a statement released by the Algerian Ministry of Housing. The same source stated that Algerian Minister of Housing also paid a visit to the Academy of Agriculture and Forestry, where he received explanations about the use of artificial intelligence in agriculture and about contemporary techniques and technologies in this field. Farmers' protests have spread across several countries in the European Union against strict EU rules on land and fertilizers use, which they say are hitting their profits. The European Commission on Wednesday proposed more steps that the farmers have demanded, including limiting agricultural imports from Ukraine, but that was unlikely to be enough to quell the anger of farmers who say they will continue to block highways and ports until their demands were met. Nabil Khazini has a report.
What started in France is now spreading across Europe. 5 months before the European elections, the protest movement staged by farmers across European countries is putting governments under pressure in several countries. They are exhausted by an energy crisis, burdened by bureaucracy and angry at efforts to curb their pollution. Their concern is that they face unfair competition from rivals due to varying environmental standards among EU states. Europe's farmers say no one is caring about their plight and nothing will stop them.
We will see, but we can keep pushing northwards towards Paris, and if we can't get to Paris, we'll go to Brussels, that's clear. We'll see, but we can also block our borders. We are determined.
We expect 400 tractors. Some are saying even around 1,000 tractors. So Brussels will be completely blocked. That is for sure. We will try to get closer to Schuman, depending on the police. We do not intend to stay there. We want to get as close as we can, but we will respect what the police says.
The farmers' upheaval had an immediate impact, with all eyes turned on a summit of European Union leaders set for Thursday. The EU made proposals to limit cheap imports from Ukraine and loosen some green regulations that would allow the farmers to use some lands that remain uncultivated.
The Commission has today proposed to lend a helping hand by allowing EU's farmers to derogate from the rules on land laying fallow set in the Common Agriculture Policy. And this is partial exemption limited to this year.
While these movements are not new, they are becoming increasingly confrontational in Europe. Governments in the EU try to deal with protests, which have been mostly peaceful, with extreme caution. Still, dozens were arrested in France as farmers' protests snarl Paris traffic.
Russian and Chinese defense ministers held a video call on Wednesday where the two sides pledged to enhance their military relations to a higher level. Both sides stressed that China-Russia comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for the new era has maintained a high level of development.
Currently, the relations between Russia and China witness the best period in their history. The confidential relations between the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, play a crucial role in the strengthening of the strategic partnership of the two countries.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was it for tonight's program. Thank you for tuning in, and if you missed any part of our broadcast, you can always check our social media platforms. Have a good night.